This steering committee meeting is important and also a formality at the same time. So just so everyone knows, the steering committee meeting is something where the board plus the chair of SPEC have a vote. Anyone else is welcome to essentially attend this or get the recording. There'll be a recording of this for people, because this is where we deal with our standards. As usual, we have an agenda. By the way, for those of you who are wondering, we've shown the antitrust policy notice earlier. It's the continuation. Our agenda has 4 items. We have draft updates to our specifications that are pending decision. We have the ISO periodic review of JTC1 past standards, space for any other business, and the close of meeting. The member roll call is a formality in that we did the member roll call for the earlier board meeting, and we have direct continuity here. Some of the board members have had to step out due to business reasons. They've already given permission to proceed. So just as a formality, we have quorum for this meeting and we have permission to proceed. The votes that we will take in this meeting will be valid for the meeting. Apart from the board member present, we have Chris Wood from Lockheed Martin, who's the chair and the validated chair-elect of the SPEC. So at this meeting, he's the existing chair as per the 2024 election, and from July 1st, he's the continuing chair based on the board vote we had earlier. He is a voting guest at this meeting. He can make a vote on whether we accept changes to our specs, what we do, etc., etc. We do have non-voting observers invited. Some of those observers are present, and some of them are not. So for the record, Jory of VP Standards is here. Hi. And we've met Jory before at another board meeting, but in case you're a new board member, Jory's responsible for all of the standardization effort of LF, and things like running JDF all under her purview. And JDF is, of course, how we make our standards. So our direct contact in JDF is Seth. He's always been working with us, but Jory is the kind of overall standards person to talk to. So we're very lucky to have her here. We have Owada-san from SocioNext, and we have apologies from Grant, who has another meeting, CTO Lenaro, and Richard, who is currently utterly jet-lagged. Okay, periodic review of our existing ISO standard is the first time. Now, there isn't much in the way of things to do on this per se, because we've already discussed this, and for the record, we've already by email had agreement to proceed, but we will have a motion here to formally do things. And Jory and I are both here to address questions if you have them. So the periodic review, every 5 years, a JTC1 pass standard has a review to make sure it's relevant in the market, people are using it, and essentially that it's ready to continue. This periodic review has a ballot, which will be an ISO ballot very similar to what we did before. Our periodic review begins in October. We've had feedback from Seth about the method to move ahead, and basically we need to say the spec as it stands is stable. It continues to be supported by us, and we haven't changed things. There's no underlying IPR changes, etc. The full details went across multiple slides, which we're not going to go through today. They're available to the board. They were shown to the board at the last meeting as well. The important point on the reapproval is that what we're doing is slightly different to what maybe a country developed spec is doing, because we're a JTC1 spec. So if there's any question about why is this process happening in this way, it's because it's a JTC1 spec. And we've had a proposed letter basically telling JTC1 that, yes, indeed, the spec as it stands is useful, it's market relevant, and there have been no intellectual property changes. This will allow JTC1 to go into the periodic review ballot process in October, and finish it within this year. The change that we will have is ISO 5230:2020 iterated to ISO 5230:2025. Minimal impact. Now, this presupposes we're not changing the spec this year. And as you know, we do have a table motion to incorporate community changes in an update of the spec. That's not actually directly relevant to this conversation, because we're probably going to look at having that update after this. We don't want to confuse this process. We don't want to do something hasty. So the motion to approve, and we have already done this by email. We've already approved this, but the motion to approve is to formally say that we're sending this letter to JTC1. We're going through this process. We're iterating the number. The standard that we have in market is valid. There's no IPR issues, and it's used. So yes, Jimmy, if I could ask for you to double check if the motion's okay.
Absolutely. So we get a motion to approve. Yeah.
Mary wins. Let's have a second.
Okay, so all in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone in disagreement? Hearing none. Anyone wishing to abstain? Hearing none either, you have unanimous approval.
All right, great. So we confirmed the previous approval on this. We have unanimous approval at this time. And that's it. We've set precedent for how to do the periodic review. Yay! We're the first one. I think next year it'll be SPDX going through the same process. Yeah. So speaking formally then, I'll be just documenting how we did this. And that will go onto the website so the other projects can just see what we did. And what we did was we were informed of the periodic review by JDF. We found out how the periodic review works and socialized it with the board. When we got to the stage of drafting the letter, the board was informed of it and approved it by email with a time period if objections existed. And then we confirmed the approval at a board meeting. So that's a process. We're the first project to do this. Very simple process, but it's an important precedent. And that'll go out with the rough timescales we did this. So, in Q1, we had the period, at the end of last year, we had the periodic review flagged. In Q1, we talked about how to do it. In Q1, we had the email-based approval of how to proceed. In Q2, we formally ratified that at the board meeting. So essentially then it's, 3 months working out what to do and having an approval and then having a formal approval at the next available board meeting. I'm just bringing this up because those processes are new. Now JDF has standards in a box, so projects can begin standards. I don't know if you have the periodic review yet, or you'll be basing it off what we did.
So we've got, as you mentioned, SPDX will be our next project to do that. Theirs will be a little different. They are updating their specification. We, as PAS submitters, have gone through their renewal process a couple times now, actually. So we're not up again for until 2027. But this has been just really great because it will help our it's 6 ISO standards now, just showing, the routine and the process. And so thank you guys for.
It's been great to explore it. And then, in the beginning, it was a case of also, if I understand correctly, communicating with JTC1 and saying, in a material sense, what's needed for this. So
Yeah.
It was interesting to find out specifically what they wanted.
They've been doing, just so you all know, you're warmly welcome to attend these. The JTC1 has yearly kind of webinars for PAS submitters. Of course, our team went to the latest, but in the future, if a representative from OpenChain would like to attend one of the JTC1 PAS webinars, we'd be happy to get you
That would be great.
Add it to the calendar, but
And you mentioned something, it's not directly relevant to our business per se, except it's relevant to JDF continuity. JDF became a pass submitter, and as a pass submitter, also had a renewal process, and that has been completed successfully.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is a different type of renewal, but equally critical.
Yeah.
So it's good. We're building the institutional knowledge for everyone out there. Brilliant. And JDF, by the way, just for the record, celebrated its 10th anniversary. So yes, JDF is technically 1 year older than OpenChain, which is on year 9, based on our formal launch. So also for the record, informally it started in 2015, so we have an informal anniversary this year. It just became official October 2016 as a project. Right, second item, proposed updates to our existing ISO standards. Now, spoiler alert, this is sort of the thing we're looking at where do we agree with what the community suggested to update? And our most important decision is if we agree, when do we agree to do it? And that's separate from the periodic review, but pretty clearly should be after, just to set context. So we've covered this on the board meeting segment, but I'll just repeat it here for the record. We had a 2-year period for the community to freely look at and suggest updates to our ISO standards. And we had comments in from multiple directions, our direct community, but also ISO. For instance, SC27, IT security, provided a ton of suggestions for the security standard. None of the suggestions that came in flagged problems with our standards. It tended to be more that people wanted to put more stuff in our standards if they wanted something substantial. So SC27 had multiple comments suggesting to embed other ISO standards in our ISO standards. That was rejected by our community based on the precedent of not bundling stuff. And we might reference something in example or reference to it, but not a requirement to bundle ISO standards. Just so you know, if you were to go back and look at where SC27 material suggestion for including another ISO standard was rejected, all of this is on GitHub and all of it's recorded in GitHub issues. So 2 years, editing period, lots of great stuff. Most of it was about making stuff clearer. The 6-month public comment period happened after that. During the public comment period, people were not meant to re-edit the specs. They were meant to flag errors or major concerns. A 3-month freeze period where no more editing at all was allowed, but an emergency situation could be flagged and throw us back into editing. All of that was completed, and now we're in front of the steering committee with the 2-year, 9-month cycle of letting the community do stuff, and then 9 months of telling the market this has been done. Do you have any comments? The changes, and this is where Jory will be like, wow, he's running through the slides at light speed. The changes were pre-socialized to the committee multiple times, so we're not going to dig into the details. For the record, on the steering committee slides, which will be published, the red line is available of all of the changes. ISO 5230 has those changes. ISO 18974 has 4 proposed changes. When it comes to the changes, essentially, they're not going to be a major change to either spec. The most important change proposed by the community is duration. That the confirmation of validity of conformance would change from 18 months to 12 months. In other words, align with the calendar year to align with other ISO standards. That applies to 5230 and to 18974. Why did we choose 18 months originally? It was chosen purposefully to be out of cycle, to force companies to double check this standard and not necessarily have it bundled in a corner of other things and say, yep, sure, whatever. At that time, compliance in open source was a much less, I wouldn't say, a much less known factor and perhaps respected factor. We wanted to make sure it was more visible. Nowadays, compliance is very obvious in open source. Having it bundled with other items does not necessarily indicate neglect. So just putting it in the normal review cycle appears to fit. And people explicitly asked for this because they found it a bit of a pain to have an out of annual review. That's it. Other changes are essentially helping things with language or perhaps inserting things for clarity. So for instance, on finding a known vulnerability, people were like, well, that's nice. How? And Chris pointed out that a process like NIST SP 830 is something that a company like Lockheed would be very familiar with. So just adding stuff like that, no material changes on those items. Now, this stuff has been pre-socialized. We're not going to go through it line by line. But I did want to make sure the committee had a chance to ask questions and raise comments or concerns about the editing process, to raise comments or concerns about the changes to the standards, and then we'll move to discussion of our next steps. So does anyone have any comments or concerns? I see Helio's unmuted.
Not really. I forgot to unmute it again. Sorry.
That's the second time.
Wonder if Chris Wood might have any comments on that.
Absolutely. Chris, do you have any comments, context, or reflections on the process?
No, I think the process is becoming fairly solid, and I don't think there's any reason to disrupt that. I would like to just mention one thing for the board's consideration, or the and that's the fact that as we're coming to this juncture where we're going to start talking about possible specifications for SBOMs and possible specifications for AI, is we need to remember that all of that stuff is all wrapped up with both the existing specifications that we've already created. And myself, from over 30 years of working in this field of software development and over 20 years of working with open source software, I would propose that we do not try to separate things like the AI and SBOMs from the security and the software licensing and provenance and pedigree type discussions, as well as vulnerability, because those things are all linked together. And when you start getting to the point where you're considering it from a broad stroke of how the customers are expecting to receive their software, they don't want to have to go look in 16 places to see what's done, but rather they need to know that from an open source standpoint, we've considered this in a cohesive manner, and we've already addressed all of those things in our response to them. That's all.
By the way, as a side note, Chris is involved in a lot of standardization, so he's also on some of the ISO committees, and he's been dealing with things like the influx of AI into the discussion. So, beyond what we've done today, it'll be useful. Chris, you're unmuted, so I guess you're going to jump in. It'll be useful to keep syncing up with you and see where the ISO committees are in the traditional process.
Yeah, and that's partly where my recent conclusion that we need to start unifying this, as I've seen moves where SBOM and vulnerability bombs and AI bombs and all of these other discussions get set up. And it's kind of solidified it in my mind, because I'm working with the ANSI or Insights on the U.S. national body and I'm also working with the ISO IEC specifications in general for both cybersecurity and privacy, and also for AI. So I've got kind of a broad reach on those subjects in those committees. So yeah, it'd be good.
And while we're just about to come back for our standards, I'll just make a side note. Bear in mind that our current status on dealing with these new topics is that we're making the AI guide, the SBOM quality guide. So there's a whole bunch of other steps, like market reaction, board decisions, before we get to the discussion of do we make another standard. It's a down the line discussion. Our current activity is not that. But I think Chris is right, and it's something we brought to the last board meeting. We should think ahead so that we already have pre-chewed our opinions, our needs, our requirements, market activities. So perhaps at our next steering committee meeting, we could try to get more of a briefing on what the ISO committees are doing in traditional standardization to see where their aggregate of experience is going as well. But for this specific meeting, the discussion is the community changes, and with the specific material change of the date of conformance validation being changed from 18 months to 12 months. But all of the changes, 5 to ISO 5230, 4 to ISO 18974. One question, do we accept or reject the changes proposed by the community? The second question, which is entirely at the board's discretion, if accepted, when do we do that? And the context here, I'm just mentioning this for Jory's sake. The context is the board informally said, at a license compliance side, we don't want to update the specification often, every 5 years at a minimum. So we're in no rush to change that. For the security side, in principle, 5 years, but it's a new field for open source and rapidly evolving. So we were always prepared to iterate the security standard more quickly. And my recommendation to the board is that the accepting of this community changes would be beneficial, especially because the community spent 2 years, 9 months on this, and there's nothing that's controversial. But the timing of implementation should be after our ISO periodic review for the existing standard. In other words, 2026 or so. And it's suggested that based on previous board discussions, we iterate both standards at the same time, which would put security into an iteration after 3 years, which is faster than the 5-year concept, but it falls in line with the expectations the board had. And we said for the community that security might iterate because market conditions are changing. So yeah, the basic proposal is that the steering committee accepts these changes and puts the iteration into 2026. So that's after the ISO periodic review on ISO 5230. And it's both standards and communicated clearly that the change is mostly about annual. The change will change the ISO numbers entirely. And it doesn't invalidate the previous standards use. So more of a strategic timing and the communication planning. I think, is there anything, Jory, that you would flag as concerning about that approach, or? Yep. Nice. With that, I guess we're at a motion to approve. Sounds good. So can we get a motion to approve?
Motion.
Okay, can I get a second?
That was Helio.
Hello, excellent.
Yeah, too late.
You finally unmuted for the right reason.
Yeah.
You should just not mute, Elliot, that's easier. Okay, everyone in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Anyone disagree? or wishing to abstain? And I think we have this motion approved.
All right, the motion is approved, all in approval. Chris, that means that we will update the specs. We can communicate that, and we'll decide the date in 2026. We need to basically sit down with you, double check with Seth, with JDF, and plan it out. As a ballpark, my guess is that we will probably go to market somewhere around Q2 2026, which would have a release in 2026 of the new ISO standards. Our time to market was 9 months with ISO 5230, and it was 7 months with ISO 18974. So 7 to 9 months would be the submission to approval. Well, we will determine the dates later. I need to sync with Chris and so on, and sync with Seth based on the fact we have approved that these will update. And Chris, we can probably go to the community pretty quickly and tell them it's approved. And the time scale, the specific time scale will be revealed, but it'll be in 2026, we'll iterate. Is that okay with you?
That sounds great.
Well done. Big hand for Chris, 2 years, 9 months. And with that, we've hit another milestone in that we've decided to substantially iterate the numbers of our ISO standards, and that's something SPDX will definitely be doing as well, because they've really changed the spec. Yeah. But we beat them to it. We're number one.
Just one quick question or comment for consideration is that you don't say that we say, for example, we reissue 5320 25. And so that is a different ending to the basic spec number. But I think that what we need to do is think about having a policy that actually has a sunset date for the earlier policy, because there are a lot of times when things change enough within the world of software development, and not necessarily licensing, but security, absolutely, that we need to consider sunsetting the old policy over a span of time to be determined, and then the new edition of the spec is the official edition that they'll have to become in conformance with. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great point. We do not have a sunset policy at this juncture or process. Having one makes sense. This is a side note that if we do have a sunset policy, we should probably have quite a bit of flexibility, because we're in procurement contracts around the world. So when we look at that policy, we want probably to set a quite long sunset so that companies will have plenty time to mess with their contracts. I remember Endosan was explaining to me that dealing with a supply chain change, it's 3 years, 5 years. Yeah. Chris, thank you. That's a great insight, and I will begin preparing the policy and process suggestions for next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other business? In that case, we're free as soon as Jimmy does his job.
Well, I'm not going to keep you longer. So can we get a motion to approve closing the meeting? From Anderson, and can we get a second?
I'll second it.
I quote some beat you to it, but it's appreciated nonetheless. So everyone in favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
Anyone wants to keep the fun going longer? Hearing none.
All right.
Anyone? I guess no one is abstaining either, so we can close the meeting.
Well done.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Chris.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you for staying
Bye.
up. My goodness, in Japan, it's a ridiculous time. It's 3:30 in Japan.
Oh, it's really nice.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, actually, therapy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
And 谢谢 for our board member from Huawei, Jin Yao Chu. Thank you very much. It's 2:30 there.